is January 19th, 2023, recording episode 144. And we're going to be going over our divisional round preview. We have a great show planned for y'all today. We're going to be ranking all of our coaching openings in the NFL after our division preview. So stay tuned till the end. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with all your friends, and follow us on social media as well. We're going to be more active on there in the coming months. And joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up?
Divisional weekend in the NFL. And, I always say that aside from possibly the Super Bowl, divisional weekend gives you the best matchups of the entire playoffs. And if you remember last year, we had that absolutely crazy divisional weekend with those 4 games that were all crazy for their different reasons. A lot of people, casual football fans, will even think back to the Chiefs-Bills shootout that went into overtime, possibly the best football game we've watched, just pure entertainment value in the last 5 or 10 years. A lot of people will think of the almost Tom Brady comeback down 27-3 against the Rams in that crazy game where the Rams dominated for a large portion. Tom Brady almost leads them to an incredible comeback, ties the game late, but that catch by Cooper Kupp down the field eventually won the game for the Rams on their way to a Super Bowl. Some people think of the crazy, weird, special teams-driven Niners-Packers game that was lower scoring in the cold in Lambeau. Remember that one? And then, of course, you had the Titans-Bengals game in which Joe Burrow was sacked 9 times, but the Bengals pulled it out late. All of those games came down to the wire, and all of them were fantastic to watch for different reasons. I'm not sure this divisional weekend can live up to that, but if we get anything close, we'll be very lucky. And I think a couple of these matchups have the potential to be very close and come down to the wire. We start off on Saturday with both 1 seeds playing. The Chiefs will host the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Philadelphia Eagles in the later window will host the New York Giants in the big divisional matchup. And then on Sunday, we get the 2 premier matchups, as most people would say, in the Bills-Bengals on CBS and then the Niners-Cowboys NFC game on Fox in the primetime window, which it so deserves to be there. So that's sort of your intro to divisional weekend, and we're going to start to break down the games. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Yeah, and for the first time ever on the show, we're going to have the goes up on the screen. So let us know what you think of that. Just get it up real fast. All right. And there it is. So okay. That's not ideal. Let's try this. All right. So let us know what you think of us adding that. We're going to have that hopefully for the rest of the NFL playoffs. So starting off, I'll let you start off here. I believe the Chiefs are favored by 8.5. So go ahead and give us your thoughts.
Well, the Jaguars obviously coming off an emotional high after their comeback against the Chargers last week. You're coming in to play the Chiefs in Arrowhead, one of the more tougher places to play in all the NFL, but especially in the playoffs. Overall, I look at this game and I say, wow, Andy Reid is almost impossible to beat off a bye week. It can be done. It has been done, but it's hard to do, especially playing in Arrowhead. In his 24-year coaching career, Andy Reid is 28-5 off bye weeks. That includes regular season and playoffs. Um, in his Kansas City career with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback, he's even better at 9-1 off a bye. And in those 10 games with Patrick Mahomes off a bye, the Chiefs offense is averaging over 30 points per game, statistically. So I look at that, and I think about this Jaguars defense that has statistically been a lot better since, over the second half of the season. Since week 9, I believe, they were like 6th in overall defensive efficiency, according to Pro Football Focus. However, I think about this particular matchup, and I say, number one, the Jaguars, and they do have an athletic front seven. I think that's one of the more underrated parts of this Jacksonville Jaguars team. I mean, Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, not the quarterback Josh Allen, the pass rusher Josh Allen, Arden Key, who we mentioned a lot in last week's episode, and some other guys as well. Those guys are obviously going to have to win up front, whether that's in one-on-one situations, just rushing four, or occasional blitz situations. These teams played earlier in the season when the Jags weren't the team they are now. But regardless, in that game, you saw a lot of the Jaguars failing to corral Patrick Mahomes in the pocket. It was a lot of scramble drill, extend the play, and Patrick Mahomes made something happen, whether that was with his legs or with his arm. And the longer you allow plays to develop, the harder this Chiefs offense becomes to not only defend, but to stop. And so I look at this Jacksonville Jaguars team, and they're going to have to win more, getting to Patrick Mahomes and staying disciplined in their rush lanes than they did earlier in the season. But they have been doing a better job of that. And I do believe they have some athletes that can win up front. And Arden Key's been a huge part of what they've been able to do defensively. Here's where I worry. Jacksonville, there's been one particular part of their defense where they've really struggled, and that's against tight ends this season. For whatever reason, they've really struggled in coverage against tight ends. They've allowed over 1,000 yards receiving to tight ends, 13.1 yards per reception to opposing tight ends. Both of those statistics for their defense rank third worst in the NFL. And if you're not good at covering tight ends, for whatever reason that might be, it's not a good matchup, especially when you're going up against Travis Kelce. So for this particular matchup, I'm watching how do they defend Travis Kelce. Do they do it with a linebacker, a nickel corner, extra man in coverage? What are they going to do to try and slow down Travis Kelce? That's going to be a key, because if you let him do his thing, it could be a long day. And then for Jacksonville offensively, the Chiefs play a lot of man coverage. So bottom line, these guys that have played really well the past couple weeks for Jacksonville, especially Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, they're going to have to win some in one-on-one situations. And Trevor Lawrence is going to have to be the second half Trevor Lawrence from last week and not the first half Trevor Lawrence. So that's sort of how I see the game. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars could hang around for a bit, but I do think the Chiefs are just too good off a bye, and you saw all the creativity that Andy Reid has in his bag, including that ring around the rosy play the last time we saw them play against the Raiders in Week 18. I mean, that was just ridiculous. So I think he'll have something in his bag, and Mahomes at home in the playoffs will play well, and I think the Kansas City Chiefs will end up winning and covering, but that's no disrespect to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah. For me, I think if you look at the way Jacksonville played that game against the Chargers, the game really turned when the Chargers were able to when the Chargers had to switch from their cover 3 to their cover 4 quarter half system. Once they got out of their cover 3 look, once the Jaguars took that away from the Chargers by hitting a play down the field, the game really opened up for the Jaguars from that point on, and they found success over and over again from that point. And the good thing for the Jaguars is they struggled with the cover three against the Chargers, and the Chiefs rarely run cover three defense. They're 30th in the league in running cover three. They barely ever run it. It's going to be mostly cover two, and I think some cover four for most of the game against the Jags. I think that will bode well for them. With that being said, though, Doug Peterson is going to have to do everything in his power to get Christian Kirk matched up down the field because you're going to need big plays. You're going to need to put up points. You're going to need packages for fourth and shorts, even for fourth and mediums, because you're not going to win this game scoring field goals. But I do think with how the Jacksonville offensive line has improved since the last time they played, I think they will be able to block better, especially against Chris Jones. I think they'll have a plan for Chris Jones going into this game this time around. And for that reason, I think the Jaguars will keep it close, and I think they will cover the spread. But the problem is the juggernaut on the other side of the ball. That's where the mismatch really is. And you mentioned it. The Jaguars in the middle of the field, they really struggle defending those middle of field routes up the seams. And that's where this Chiefs team really thrives with Travis Kelce. If the Jaguars can take that away, there's just so many options for this Chiefs team. And I just don't really see the Jaguars slowing it down. It would really have to take, just a couple stops here and there that can make a huge difference. But in terms of consistently being able to get stops to help out their offense, I don't see that happening. I think it's going to have to be the other way around. The Jags offense helping out the Jags defense to keep them in it. I'm going to say, just to throw a score out there, I'm going to say this will be 34-27 Chiefs.
Okay, you have it a little closer. When I say the Chiefs are going to cover the spread, I think it's going to be a 10 to 13 point win. I'm not saying it's going to get out of hand like some people I have heard over podcasts think it's going to. I do think this Jacksonville Jaguars will keep it close for most of the game. I'm going to say like a 31-21 type game, somewhere in that range. One more thing I want to mention before we transition. One of the reasons this Chiefs offense has been so good throughout the season, has been one of the best in the NFL, if not the best in terms of points per game. I'm not exactly sure that's the case, but they're up there, is because, number one, they were really good converting third downs. So if you're Jacksonville, you got to find ways to get stops on third downs, but particularly in the red zone is where the Chiefs are awesome. And so if you're the Jaguars, I'm really looking for one or two stops in the red zone where you get that 4-point swing that could be so critical in helping you stay in the game, but give you a chance in the fourth quarter. And that's all you really want. You were not a very good red zone defense this year if you're Jacksonville. So that's another matchup that I'll be watching. But you can say that just about any game in the NFL these days. So I do think the Chiefs will cover the spread, but in reality, that's like a 10, 13-point win. But let's transition to the second game on Saturday, and I'll let you start with this one. That is an NFC East divisional game between the Giants and the Eagles. The Eagles are favored by just over a touchdown at 7.5. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think what the Giants showed last week was legitimate. I think it's going to have to be the Giants defense playing the game of their lives to hold up, though. I'm not saying this to discount anything they did last week. What they did last week was extremely impressive, but this is an entirely different level of opponent, in my opinion. So I think matchup wise, the matchups aren't great for New York Giants perspective. But I think what the Giants have to do is just have a plan for AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. I think those are the key cogs of that offense, particularly in that passing game, obviously. And then from there, I think you have the horses up front. Like the Giants have shown to be able to defend the run pretty solidly for most of this season. The key is just going to be able to is just being able to get this Eagles team into third and long situations, because from there you can have Wink Martindale um, drawing up his blitz packages, and that's when things can get interesting. Um, I think um, this Eagles offense is going to be a tough task to stop, but I think it's doable if they're able to stop the run early in the game. Because the Eagles do have a tendency, if the run isn't working early, to get a little pass happy. And obviously, they're a fantastic passing team, but I think that's what the Giants would want them to fall into, if that makes sense. And the other side of the ball, um, I think Daniel Jones, the biggest thing is keep running the football with Daniel Jones. He has to continue to be a threat to keep the Eagles from playing man coverage. I think with the threat of Daniel Jones, it'll keep the Eagles from playing that man coverage, and then you'll be able to attack the zones, the space within those zones, um, and that'll make things a little bit easier on you. Um, and if you're the Eagles defensively, I think you just want to stop the run first and foremost, but also you want to take away the intermediate game for Daniel Jones. That's his bread and butter. We saw that last week. Those 7 to, I'd say, 20-yard routes down the field. That's where Daniel Jones really likes to attack. If you could take that away, you can have your defensive back uh, sitting at those yardages. Then you can take a lot of what the Giants like to do away, especially with the front that you have in that front seven. You have the size up front to be able to stop the run without having to bring more guys into the box. So with all that being said, you can kind of sense where I'm going with my pick. I'm gonna pick the Eagles to cover the spread here. Um, I'm gonna say a little bit of a lower scoring game. I'm going to say 27-17 Eagles.
I think you hit it right on the head. From a Giants perspective, obviously that front four has been playing awesome. They've been winning in their matchups the past couple weeks. This Giants pass rush has been getting home. You look at, in particular, two guys up front who have been absolutely great. Dexter Lawrence in the middle, both in the run game and being disruptive in the pass game, collapsing the pocket. And then Kayvon Thibodeau on the edge has also been winning in his matchups. And against a really good offensive line like the Eagles, it'll be a test for this Giants front. But I do think that they can have some success. I do think that the amount that they blitz, because in Wink Martindale's history, and some this season with the Giants, it's carried over from Baltimore. He likes to blitz, and sometimes he gets a little too blitz happy. And in week 14, I believe it was, they blitzed Jalen Hurts like 52% of the time. And that did not turn out very well for them. The Eagles exploited their secondary by finding matchups with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, different guys in the slot, in particular Darnay Holmes and Nick McLeod. Two of their nickel corners really struggled in coverage, as a lot of corners do against A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I think a key this week is an X factor to watch out for from a Giants perspective is Adoree Jackson, who's actually returned. He did not play in either regular season matchup between these two teams. And last week had some very good success in what he was able to do matching up with Justin Jefferson. So I do think that you have a little bit more of a matchup problem. Not a matchup problem, but you are able to match up a little better now that you have Adoree Jackson, who's by far, I think, your most talented corner. So I'm looking at winning some one-on-one battles, especially on critical downs like third down, trying to get to Jalen Hurts without blitzing as much, and then Adoree Jackson in that secondary. I'm interested to see how much of a difference he actually makes, especially when the Eagles try to match up some guys in the slot, which is what they've done this season against the Giants secondary. So that's really what it comes down to from a Giants perspective. And then on the offensive side of the football, you're looking to run it. The Eagles have mass up front, Jordan Davis. I mean, you know the names. So it's not particularly easy to get a consistent run game going, but it can be done. The Eagles allowed, I believe, over 120 yards rushing per game on the ground. So if you can get that run game going, and as you said, Daniel Jones, allow him to attack that short to intermediate range passing game and play mistake-free football, you can win this game. But you got to score in the red zone. And I do think that this will end up being, as you said, sort of a lower scoring game. And I do think the Eagles will win. I'm going to say 27-17.
Okay, so we're both going with the same score there. Let's move right along here. Next game, it's going to be Cincinnati going to visit the Buffalo Bills, the rematch from Monday Night Football a few weeks ago. Here, let me get this up on the screen, and I'll let you start us off here.
Well, it's Cincinnati and Buffalo. This is the game that we weren't able to see because of the DeMar Hamlin situation. Luckily, first of all, he's okay and he's out of the hospital. I believe he's been back with the team some, so that's great news. We've come a long way since that Monday night in Cincinnati. But we get the game that we wanted to see that night that we didn't get to see. And this is so exciting because I think this matchup this weekend, the more I think about these two games that are being played on Sunday, because my Super Bowl pick was Bills-Niners in our wild card episode when we made our Super Bowl pick at the beginning of the playoffs. The more I think about these matchups, the more I'm starting to question, like, if things go the way I've been playing them out in my head, neither of those teams might make it past this weekend. I could be in trouble in terms of my Super Bowl pick. Particularly this one is the one that worries me more, to be honest with you, with Cincinnati. I just think over the past month or two, they have been the more complete football team. And I think they are the more complete football team. However, this game is in Buffalo, where they do not lose playoff games, very rarely. They've only lost one in their history out of like 15. And it's going to be an emotional sight. That's one of the questions that I've had with Buffalo over the past 2 months is how much are they going to play with their food? Because it seems like they're a little loose sometimes. Josh Allen has been a little turnover happy, to be honest with you. 22 turnovers leads the league of any quarterback in the league. 16 interceptions, 6 fumbles. He has to take care of the ball. I mentioned it in our wild card recap. If you haven't seen that yet, go check it out. We recorded that on Tuesday. But yeah, you got to clean those mistakes up, play mistake-free football, because this Bengals defense, has been really good this season, especially since they got what is his name? The guy up front. I'm just blanking on his name right now.
DJ Reader.
DJ Reader back. Yep. He does a lot for that defensive front. And so for the Bills, you got to establish more of a running game early, and that's going to open up some things in the passing game. I do think you're a little limited in terms of your depth at the wide receiver position, although getting Cole Beasley back helps a little bit. But the main thing for the Bills is don't play with your food. Don't get pass happy. Stick to the running game, even if it's not working to the degree that you want it to. And don't turn the ball over. And on the other side, you look at this Joe Burrow-led Bengals offense that for the most part has been clicking on all cylinders outside of some matchups in division. You look at his statistics against teams in the AFC North who have some more familiarity with this Bengals team this year. And then matchups outside the AFC North, he's been fantastic in games outside the NFC North. His numbers are way up. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but he's just been better. And if this came down to the fourth quarter, you look at how these two quarterbacks have performed this year in the fourth quarter. If you're asking me to trust one quarterback in the fourth quarter of a close game, I'm trusting Joe Burrow right now. And that's not that I don't trust Josh Allen, that Josh Allen can't win in big spots. But the simple fact is Joe Burrow's been better in those spots. Now, here's where I'm concerned with Cincinnati offensively. They've struggled a little bit to establish a running game the past couple weeks after it was really hitting on all cylinders with Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon in like the middle portion of the season. But lately, it's been sort of shaky. And this offensive line has now lost 3 starters, with Jonah Williams, their left tackle, going down last week in the wild card game, and then 2 starters before that we mentioned on last week's episode in our wild card preview when they were about to face Baltimore. 3/5 of your starting offensive line has been lost the past 3 weeks. And it's funny because going into week 16, the Bengals were one of 3 teams in the league that had all 5 of their offensive line starters play all their games. But now is when the injury bug hits at the most important time of the season, which is unfortunate for the Bengals. The Bills, and I'm looking at Gregory Rousseau and Ed Oliver and the guys that they have up front without Von Miller, a pass rush that sometimes has struggled without Von Miller to a degree. You have to get home against Joe Burrow, at least to a degree. The Bengals are 0-3 when Joe Burrow is sacked 5 or more times this year. They are 13-1 when he is sacked less than that. So for me, that's where the game comes down to for the Bills. Whether you have to blitz some or not, I'm looking at the guys up front for the Bills. They got to win some, and they got to get to Joe Burrow. But even when you get to Joe Burrow, you have to make sure you bring him down because he has been so good at extending plays and making plays off script. The more I think about this game, with everything I just mentioned, I do feel like the Bengals are the better team, and they could definitely win this game. But just for the sake of my Super Bowl pick that has stuck the entire season through the ups and downs of this Buffalo Bills team, I'm going to pick the Bills in a very close game, 30-27 on a game-winning field goal. I do think, as I mentioned, the Bengals won't be one bit surprised if they do win. I feel like they're the better team right now overall. But just to stay consistent with my Super Bowl pick from the beginning of the season and the beginning of the playoffs, I'm picking the Bills, and it's literally for no other reason than that.
Okay, yeah. The question going into this game is, for the Bengals, can they run the football? Because if they can, then that really puts the Bills in a bind. Um, we've seen the Bills struggle with giving up plays down the sideline. We saw it in the Miami game. Once the first quarter happened, and I guess the Dolphins got some of their jitters out of the way, they really started to hit on those passes. And Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are two of the guys in this league where if you've got problems giving up big plays, you don't want to face them, especially not in a playoff setting. The one question is, where's this offensive line at, and how much time can they give Joe Burrow? Right now, I think Alex Kappa and Jonah Williams are questionable to return for Sunday's game, I believe. But it's looking kind of iffy right now. And I'm just going to make my pick assuming they don't play because I think that's most likely what will happen. And I just think Greg Rousseau and AJ Epinesa and Ed Oliver will be able to win against his Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. And, Joe Burrow has the scramble ability, obviously, and the ability to make something out of nothing repeatedly over and over and over again. But, I mean, you mentioned the game where they gave up 9 sacks last year and still won. That was only due to the very incompetent Tennessee offense that game. If Tennessee doesn't turn the ball over as much as they did, they more than likely go on to win that game. And I just don't see the Bengals being able to get away with giving up sacks against a high-powered offense like the Buffalo Bills. And I think that's going to be what ends up doing them in ultimately. I do think it's close. It's going to be a close game. I think this is going to be the game of the weekend, arguably, right there with Cowboys 49ers. I think I'm going to say it might be a little bit lower scoring than people think. I'm going to say 27-24 Bills on a game-winning field goal, just like you said.
Okay. And we both have the Bengals, therefore, covering the 5.5-point spread. So there you go. On to our last game of the weekend, and I'll let you start with this one because it involves the Dallas Cowboys. While you pull up the graphic in the lower third, the Dallas Cowboys at the San Francisco 49ers, two name brands in the NFL. This game is going to get massive ratings just for the simple fact that it is on Fox, and it is two blue blood brands, if you will, of the National Football League, particularly in the NFC. This is a matchup that dominated like the 1980s and 1990s in the National Football League. So with that being said, San Francisco, I believe, is minus 3.5 or 4, one of the two. I went with -4 because it was CBS's line, but some places could have it differently. What do you think and why?
Man, I think this is going to be a close game. First and foremost, I think the Cowboys, where they have the edge, is with their pass rush. That's their one saving grace in this entire game is they'll be able to get to the quarterback. And I don't think since Brock Purdy has been in the lineup, I don't think the Niners have faced a defense quite as good as the Cowboys. And you can call me a homer, but I truly believe that. And I mean, even if you don't believe that, just based on the pass rush, it's a different type of test than what he's faced. I mean, Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, they'll be able to get to the quarterback. Mike McGlinchey, Trent Williams, they're two of the best tackles in the league. But the fact is, the Cowboys are number one in pressure rate, and they've been able to show it all year that they can get to the quarterback. The questions will be on the back end. I like the matchup of Trayvon Diggs against Brandon Ayuk. I think that will bode well in maybe taking him away a little bit, but no amount of, superhuman coverage will be able to take away every single weapon on this San Francisco 49ers offense. Um, there's just no way possible. You can't take away everything. You just kind of have to pick your poison. The biggest thing is just going to be, can they force negative plays on first and second down, force third and long, make Brock Purdy, think a little bit. Because when this 49ers offense is clicking, they're getting big play after big play and scoring at will. And once they get into that zone, you can't really get them out of it. And if they get into it here, that's just a nightmare waiting to happen. You just got to make them work for everything. Keep everything in front of you. It's easier said than done, but for the most part, the Cowboys were able to do it last year. Obviously, they now have Christian McCaffrey this time around, and I believe the 49ers are playing better football than they were last year. But I also think the Cowboys are as well. I'm kind of talking in circles here. Let me make my point about the Cowboys, then I'll get it over to you. The Cowboys offense, that's where this game will be won and lost. Will they be able to protect Dak Prescott to where he can make those big plays that we saw Geno Smith make? Because if they can protect, then that makes this game a lot more interesting. Because the fact is, for the Cowboys to win this game, they're going to have to put up points. And I know I was really high on the 49ers defense for most of the year. I even said that they're an all-time level unit. I've kind of pushed back on that these last couple of weeks after seeing more football these last few weeks. I don't think they're playing at that same level they were through the middle part of the season. They've had some big plays given up, particularly in the secondary. And I do think these corners can be had on the outside. Travarius Ward and Lenore, I believe is his name, number 38. So if the Cowboys can protect and give Tony Pollard the freaking ball, not Zeke, then they'll have a chance to win. And before the playoffs, I picked the 49ers and the Bengals to play in the Super Bowl. And I already picked the Bengals to lose. So I'm picking my Cowboys. I got to go with my team, man. I picked against them last week. It didn't turn out well. And I'm just going to ride with my team. It's going to be a close game no matter what. It's going to be a tough challenge. But I'm going to say Cowboys win a close one. 35-34.
Well, the more I have listened to podcasts over the past day or so, 24, 48 hours, the more I've thought about this game, the more I think about Dallas and the challenges they could present to this Niners team who, let's be honest, and I think you made a great point. And look, it's not anything that the 49ers could have done. It's their schedule. It is what it is. It's how it played out, right? It's not the 49ers' fault. But they did not play the greatest strength of schedule this year, just in general. I think they were like bottom 5 in like strength of schedule. It was one of the 5 easiest schedules in the league. And over the past however many weeks that Brock Purdy has been playing, 6 or 7 weeks, they have not faced the greatest competition. And the statistics bear it out. I think the combined records of teams that they have faced is like 35 and 49 and something. So I do think that's not to say that they have gotten away with things, because in a lot of those games, they took care of business as they should against inferior competition. I mean, they were blowing out some of those teams. They were playing really good football. So it's not taking anything away from the 49ers. The point is, this Cowboys team, I think, is a step up in competition. And I'm interested to see how Brock Purdy and this Niners team in general responds to that. I think they'll be up for the game. Obviously, it's a huge game at home in prime time. And look, this is the great thing about football, is in sports in general, is there are facts and then there's opinions. And the fact that with new information and new viewing and more sample size, opinions change over the course of the season. And I, as did you, I may have not voiced it on this podcast. I may have just forgotten. I did. And I think I was saying that this 49ers defense a month or so back was on pace to be historically great, statistically at least. And I, the same as you, have sort of backed off of that opinion the past couple of weeks, because with new information, your opinions are allowed to change. That's just how it works. So with all that being said, the more I think about this, and with everything that I've listened to, I do think with as much talent as the Cowboys have defensively, I mean, they got a playmaker on every single level on that defense. Now, I do worry about some of their cornerback depth. I think that will eventually hurt them, whether it's this weekend, I don't know. Whether it's next weekend if they get to the NFC Championship game against possibly the Eagles, or even in the Super Bowl against a really high-powered offense like the Chiefs, the Bengals, or the Bills. I do think that not lack of depth, but I think they need another guy in that secondary. I think they're just lacking one more really good cornerback, really good secondary player. I think that will get exposed eventually. But their ability to win up front. And one thing that stood out to me last week was their aggression defensively, how they were hitting, their physicality. And I think there are not a whole lot of teams that I think can stand up to the physicality of the San Francisco 49ers on both sides of the football. And I think what we saw last week proved that the Dallas Cowboys can, with not only their talent, but their will defensively. In this Dan Quinn style of defense, I think can present challenges that Brock Purdy hasn't seen yet. Now, that's the matchup I'm really watching. Kyle Shanahan's offense against Dan Quinn's defense. These two guys have some history. If you think back to Super Bowl 51, they were part of the same coaching staff that blew the lead to the New England Patriots in that Super Bowl for the Atlanta Falcons. So they have some history together, but now they face each other. And I do think some of the things that this Cowboys defense is able to do, they are going to force Brock Purdy into a couple of turnovers. I think that can change the game. I was really encouraged by Dak's performance last week. That might not carry over to this week, but I do think with Tony Pollard and some of these playmakers, including CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, et cetera, Dalton Schultz, who's been featured more prominently the past couple of weeks, I think there are chances to be had against the San Francisco secondary if your protection can hold up. And I think it can. I think over the course of his career, and I know last year's matchup, the time management issue against the 49ers in the wild card game, he deserved to be. That wasn't the greatest decision, and whether that was Mike McCarthy or someone else, you got criticized for that. But I do think Mike McCarthy, at some points in times in his Cowboys career, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, has been overly criticized. And I think if he ends up winning this game, what are you going to say then? Now he's got the Cowboys to an NFC Championship game, and they could win that too. But you got to get past this weekend. And even though I have the 49ers in the Super Bowl at the beginning of the playoffs, I'm going to change that. And I'm going to say the Cowboys win this game close. I'm going to say 28 to 24. And I think it'll shut a lot of the people up that are complaining about Mike McCarthy for whatever reason.
Yeah, I don't feel great about picking the Cowboys, but I'm going to stick with it. The one thing that does scare me is this 49ers running game. We've seen throughout the season against the top running teams in the NFL, the Cowboys have been a little bit squishy up the middle. But I do think these linebackers are going to have to play a huge role in plugging up those holes. Van Der Esch and Anthony Barr are going to have to play the games of their lives if they want to be able to stop this run. Because outside, like if you're not able to stop the run, you're not able to force negative plays on first and second down, like I said, then it was already tough to begin with, but then it's borderline impossible. So, okay. Now let's transition to the second part of the podcast where we're just going to be going over the top 5 coaching openings in the NFL. We're just going to be ranking them 1 to 5 from best to worst. And I guess we'll start from worst and go all the way to our number ones. And I'll let you start off.
Well, before we say anything, that was our divisional preview. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed that. We'll maybe put timestamps in the description so you can jump to whatever you want to see. But with as much as we love football, there are only 7 total games left. The 4 divisional games, 2 championship games, and the Super Bowl. That's 7 total games, if my calculations are correct, in the entire football season, because we don't have any more college football either. So, all that being said, we have to start looking forward to the offseason. And part of that is coaching turnover. It happens every year in the NFL. There are typically 5 to 8 jobs every season that open up and that have to be filled. Head coaching vacancies because teams make head coaching changes. And so far, there are 5 head coaching openings for this offseason in the NFL. Those teams are the Houston Texans, the Indianapolis Colts, the Arizona Cardinals, the Denver Broncos, and the Carolina Panthers. So we will be ranking those 5 teams from who we think are the least intriguing, is the least intriguing job. Doesn't mean it's a terrible job by any means. It could, but the least intriguing to the most intriguing. So at number 5, I'm going to start with the Houston Texans. And I know this could seem harsh, but I sort of look at this from a perspective of like, oh, if I'm going into that situation, do I really want to go? If I'm a coach, do I want to go to that situation? And the bottom line is, if I'm a coach, out of any of these 5 jobs, I don't want to go to the Houston Texans. When I look at the Texans as a franchise, I see a lot of indecisiveness and instability. The 2 I's that you really don't want in an NFL franchise. The quarterback situation isn't terrible. I mean, I believe more in Davis Mills than some people do. I did like what they started doing at the end of the season. They started playing more competitive football. You do have those draft picks, which are intriguing, but the bottom line for me is, and it's not the greatest division, so that could be a draw if you can get some things going, build through the draft, get the right coach in there. You could have something sooner rather than later. But I just think that the Colts are way better than they showed this year. They just got to get the right quarterback. And the Jaguars, I don't think are going anywhere anytime soon. We'll see about the Titans, but with Mike Vrabel as their head coach, I do think that a 7-game losing streak to end their season to miss the playoffs after they were the runaway favorite through over half the season is a little bit of an anomaly. I don't think that particular situation will play itself out again. So I still think you're at the bottom of this division if you're Houston. And even though you have those draft picks, I don't love it. I don't love the coaching situation. And you look at their history, it's a lot of we're going to hire you, and you have a very short leash. But the bottom line is, at some point, it's not the coach's fault. It's your roster that isn't good enough. And so something has to change in the Houston Texans organization.
Yeah, that's fair. And I do think there's a very clear argument to be made that they're definitely number 5. But I definitely did go in a different direction here. You may not agree with it all the way, but at number 5, I went with the Arizona Cardinals. I think at the current state of their team at the moment, they're currently strapped at the cap. They're capped out basically. A lot of big contracts. Arguably their best defensive player just retired in J.J. Watt. And I just think there's a lot of continuity that isn't going to be there the next couple of years roster wise, just because of all of the win now players that you had signed are going to be leaving, particularly in this Kyler Murray free season. There's a good chance he'll get in midseason, but who knows where they'll be at when he gets in there. And then there's also the Kyler Murray situation. It just seems like there's a lot of drama going on with that situation every single season. And maybe that'll dissipate now that he got the contract that he wanted, but it just doesn't seem like a good vibe. Doesn't seem like the players really have been responding to him in the way that you'd want to see. And I don't know. I think addressing the Texans thing is, I think you go in there and it's a clean slate, and I think there is something to that. Having a clean slate versus having to clean this slate is an entirely different thing, especially since both organizations have a history of having short leashes with their coaches. So I think there's a good argument for the Texans to be at number 5, but based on those reasons, I went with the Cardinals.
Fair enough. And I have the Cardinals at number 4. I don't see this as some incredibly attractive job either. But I think if you're a coach taking this job, you're not necessarily looking at competing next year, because I don't think with your current situation, especially considering the fact that Kyler Murray will likely miss some of next year with his ACL injury that he suffered. I don't remember exactly when that was, but couldn't be more than like a month
Week
ago
8 or somewhere in there. Week 8,
Yeah,
week 9, week 10, somewhere in
2
there.
months ago, something like that. He's going to miss probably the first month or so of next year. And you play in a pretty tough division. I mean, from what we saw with Seattle, if they can carry some of that over, plus all their draft picks, you expect them to be a pretty viable, at least playoff option in the NFC. And then you look at the 49ers, and what they're doing. I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. We'll see what happens at the quarterback spot. Possibly Trey Lance comes back next year. You still have Brock Purdy, obviously on a rookie deal. And we'll see what happens with Jimmy G. The quarterback market is interesting if the 49ers wanted to pursue elsewhere as well. But, it's a tough situation. The general manager, Steve Keim, he's out. So maybe if you're a head coach in this situation, you might get to align yourself with a new front office regime, and that could potentially be a little bit exciting for you if you can align on that. We'll see what happens with DeAndre Hopkins. They do have work to do, both sides of this roster. And we'll address the roster situations, I'm sure, during the offseason. We did that offseason blueprint segment for each division last offseason. It's possibly something that could be happening again. We haven't talked about it, but that'd be interesting. I do think with the number 3 pick, and they do actually have some cap space, at least projected. They're number 12 right now on Spotrac in terms of cap space. It's not a whole lot at like $15 million, but they have more than you think. It's not an incredibly attractive job considering what you said. They have not had a head coach last longer than 6 years in their existence, which is pretty insane, especially coming from where I come from, where you have the Steelers, where you've had 3 coaches since like 1960 or something. That's pretty insane to think a coach can't last longer than 6 years. But I think you have options, and at the very least, you have a quarterback that, if you can figure it out, get the right coach to go with him, I think you got something with this Arizona team. Remember, this is just a team over a year removed from a playoff berth. So, and it doesn't take that long to flip it, as we have seen. So, I don't think it's incredibly attractive, but I also don't think it's a total disaster.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not a complete disaster. For me, it's just mostly they don't have the high level talent at the high leverage positions, if that makes sense, particularly on both lines, O-line and defensive line. That's where I kind of point to the problems that I was referring to, particularly with J.J. Watt leaving and with potentially Rodney Hudson leaving as well in that center position. So there's going to be a lot of questions going into the offseason. We can question those a little bit later. But my number 4 team was the Houston Texans. For some of those reasons that I stated earlier, particularly with the whole clean slate part of it. You do have some young talent there. You have a lot of draft picks. You can have say in those draft picks and how you want to build that roster. And then there's a good possibility at that number 2 spot. We don't know if someone could jump the Chicago Bears or if the Bears are just going to shock the world and take a quarterback. But there is a good chance that the Houston Texans do end up with Bryce Young, and I do think that's a plus. But it is up in the air, and it's not a sure thing either, which is understandable. And then I just think this is a team that has shown some good qualities in the past couple of years. You point to a team like the Detroit Lions, who played in a lot of close games in that year where they only won 2 games, I believe. And they ended up with the number 2 pick as well. I don't think the Texans are in for a turnover like that, but the blueprint is there. They were able to hang tough with a lot of teams and play in a lot of close games, just like the Lions were that year. So there are some similarities. I think bringing a Bryce Young into the mix, or whatever high-level player you get at that number 2 spot, I think it's a decently good job if you want to be able to have say in how our roster is built.
All right. I want to hear your number 3 first.
My number 3 is, I was really debating on this one. It was tough. But my number 3 is the Indianapolis Colts. Um, it was a really tough one between, the last 3, which was the Colts, Panthers, Broncos. But however you want to slice it, um, for me, it was just the Colts situation where Jim Irsay is going to be over your shoulder in your decision making. And Jim Irsay, say what you want about him, but um, out of all the owners in the NFL, it's not the worst thing in the world to have an owner that clearly wants to win. But at the same time, I think having an owner that involved in day to day decision making can be a bit of a hindrance. Um, and that's not the sole reason I went with the Colts, but I think it's also um, they're in a weird state of flux right now. Weird, like they've been in the window of mediocrity, and that's not where you want to be in the NFL or any sports league for that matter. And they've had trouble finding the right guy at quarterback, and it doesn't feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel. That could change very quickly. Obviously, they could go and get a Derek Carr or pick up a Will Levis in the draft or CJ Stroud in the draft, or even move up to number 1, which I've heard rumors about. But at the same time, I do think they are a little bit farther away than maybe some people in that organization may have thought going into the year. Their offensive line needs work, and I do think they could get an edge rusher that could help them out. Um, it's not the worst job, but it's not the best job either.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're aligned on this one. The Colts being the number 3. It's not a bad job at all. It's also not the best job out of these 5. I think you look at an organization that, and one thing I always come back to is what division are you competing in? And as I mentioned, and as I laid out earlier with the AFC South, you're not as far away as you think from possibly winning this division, especially if some turnover happens within the Titans. We don't know what's going to happen there. The Jacksonville Jaguars obviously are a team on the rise, but we'll have to see them continue that sustained success that we haven't seen yet. And then, with the Houston Texans, as we just mentioned. So I look at that and I say, while you may be far from potentially winning a Super Bowl, which is what you ultimately want to do, you're not that far off from possibly turning this thing around and getting back to the playoffs. Now, that all is going to depend on a quarterback. But I think for the Colts, the good thing is you have some options. You are the number 4 overall pick in the draft, and you have $17.5 million projected in cap space. So you're not in a terrible situation there with your draft capital, then also your cap space. You could go out and get a guy. It doesn't have to be a Derek Carr. It could be a Jimmy Garoppolo. The list goes on and on. We'll talk about that once the season ends. Or you could draft a guy at the number 4 spot. Now, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if by that time Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are already off the board. I'm not sure if you go with a Will Levis, but we'll talk about that a different time. But you do have options at quarterback. If you can get that quarterback situation figured out, easier said than done, then I don't think I worry about some of the not aged, like can't play anymore, but they do have some veterans on this team. I think they could use to get a little younger. I think they need another weapon offensively. Obviously, I like Michael Pittman Jr. And I think Alec Pierce could take another step forward next year, and that could help as well. But they need another guy in that offense. to help them. Jonathan Taylor, you have a top back. Quentin Nelson, top offensive lineman, but he struggled to stay healthy. You need to revitalize that offensive line. And you have some pieces defensively with Shaquille Leonard, the linebacker, DeForest Buckner, Kwity Paye. You could use to add a pass rusher, fill in pieces here and there. But it's a weird situation. I really don't know how to describe it with like one or two words. It's just sort of like in this state of purgatory, if you will. And I'm not sure that could be attractive to some coaches. Some coaches could view that as, oh, this isn't that far away from getting it back on track if we can get at least a competent quarterback in here. Or some coaches could view that as, we don't know about this. We may need to go full on rebuild. I don't know how coaches view this, but for me, it's just kind of like, yeah, that could be intriguing, or I'm not so sure. So
Yeah.
that's the Colts situation. My number 2 is the Denver Broncos. And then I have obviously Carolina number 1, but we'll get there in a second. For Denver, I don't think Russell Wilson is going to be the Russell Wilson of his potential MVP front-running Seattle days. But I also don't think Russell Wilson is near as bad as we saw this year. I do think the Broncos are a name brand in the National Football League. You have good ownership. You have a roster that, if Russell Wilson and this offense can figure it out, that could win fairly quickly. With this defense that was one of the best in the league, and some young weapons who have struggled with injury issues, but they can stay on the field, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, et cetera, Cortland Sutton, the list goes on, then I do think this Broncos team is ready to win sooner than later. And I just think that Russell Wilson is going to be a lot better than he showed this past season. And if he is, then you look at potentially, while your division is tough, you look at Derek Carr leaving the Raiders. We're uncertain what's going to happen with the Raiders. So that's something to look out for. And then you have obviously the Chargers and the Chiefs, who are not going anywhere anytime soon. But I do think if you're the Broncos, even though you don't have the draft pick that you would like to have back at this point, you still have a late first rounder because of the Bradley Chubb trade that you made with the Dolphins. So I think it's not as bad as some people think. You might be a little bit strapped for cap space, which isn't great. You're not towards the bottom, but it's not a great cap space situation. You'd like to have more, especially considering you don't have that top draft pick. But I think it all comes down to Russell Wilson. If it were me, I think with the amount of work he puts in the offseason, I think he's going to be a lot better next year. And we're going to find out very quickly if this was solely a Nathaniel Hackett issue, because I think you can make the argument that a lot of the blame could be put on Nathaniel Hackett for some of their struggles offensively. So I really like the Denver Broncos job. I think it's being overlooked in some ways.
Yeah, I actually debated for a little bit of putting Denver at 1 actually, but I did end up putting Denver at 2, just because of the cap situation and the flexibility that brings, and the possibility that Russell Wilson maybe isn't fixable, and then you just have to eat that contract, which would just be a nightmare. But it is possible. I do agree with you in thinking that Russell Wilson is better than what he showed this year, and also that offensive line was just torn to shreds by like week 7. So any chance they had of finding some kind of momentum was just shot. As soon as the injury started piling up on the offensive line, and then Javonte Williams, losing him was the cherry on top of everything. They had some semblance of offense, some semblance of a running game when he was in there. But after he got injured, everything just went to shit. Sorry for my language, but there's no other word to describe it. But anyways, moving forward though, the defense is fantastic. I love watching that defense play. And there's something there. And then the wide receiver core, I think getting Tim Patrick back would kind of bring this thing together. We talked a little bit in the offseason, in our season preview, about um, differentiating skill sets at the wide receiver position. We've kind of seen that play out in Kansas City this year. I think the Denver Broncos have that. I think Jerry Jeudy showed some things late in the year, particularly some good chemistry, and then Courtland Sutton showed some things early in the year with his chemistry with Russell Wilson. And if they just scored 22 points per game, they're at least a 500 team. So there's something there. This job is not unfixable.
Yeah,
With that, I'll move into my number one. We both have the same team, number one, the Carolina Panthers. For me, it was just I liked what I saw from the defense to close the year, and then on top of that, the thing that we've said over and over with the Carolina Panthers year after year after year was, what is this offensive line and what is the quarterback situation? The quarterback situation still isn't figured out, to put it simply. But the offensive line, I really like where this offensive line is at going into next year. You have a young group that's going to grow together. I think you really found something with putting Brady Christensen over at tackle. He struggled at guard, but as soon as you put him at tackle, everything seemed to click for him. And then you've picked up some guys in free agency for the interior of the offensive line. And then, of course, you have Ike Ekwonu, who was dominant in the run game and was good pass blocking as well. So that offensive line is something to build off of. And then the defensive line is something to build off of as well. And that defensive tackle they drafted top 10 a few years ago. Can't think of his name right now. And then, of course, Brian Burns on the edge. So I think the Panthers have, I guess, the most overall talent out of these teams. I like what they have, a skill position standpoint, and defensively they're really solid. So just, I think, finding the quarterback, which, I mean, that's a shit show in itself. But if you just get a freaking quarterback, then you could do worse than the Carolina Panthers.
Oh, yeah. First of all, you have, and I'm not saying this is a perfect situation, having an aggressive owner, but you have an aggressive owner that is willing to go the distance, I believe, to at least make this a competitive team, put a competitive product on the field. He will go the extra mile to get that quarterback if he gets the right coach. David Tepper, a guy that I know because he spent a lot of time under the Rooney family with the Pittsburgh Steelers as sort of a minority owner, had stakes in the Pittsburgh Steelers' success over the years. Now the owner of the Carolina Panthers, he's shown that in both directions to be aggressive and doing what he needs to do to make moves, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think having an owner that will go the distance for you is a very intriguing draw, if you will. Secondly, the division that you are in right now, currently, there is a lot of turnover, a lot of uncertainty as to who's actually going to rise to the top of this division. We don't know if Tom Brady will be back in Tampa next year. And even if he is, what does that look like? Is Tampa the runaway favorite to win this division next year if he comes back? I wouldn't say so. I think they can be beaten. We obviously there's a lot to play out, draft, free agency, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, from what I saw from Tampa Bay this year, I wouldn't claim them to be some unbeatable team at this point. I think the Panthers, with all the young talent that they have, which I'll talk about in a minute, I think you can make the argument they're in a better position right now. The Saints, some uncertainty there. And then obviously the Falcons. I like Arthur Smith. I like a lot of the things the Panthers showed this year. Or not the Panthers, the Falcons. But what does that quarterback situation look like? So that's another thing. Just some real uncertainty in your division, more so than other divisions, I think. And you're not that far away if you're the Panthers. As we saw this year, if a couple other games go your way, you would have been in the playoffs. You would have been the division winner already. So I think with that being said, aggressive owner, uncertainty and turnover within your division, and then all the young talent on this team. From an offensive perspective, obviously you got to figure out the quarterback position. But Sam Darnold wasn't absolutely terrible. I do think he showed improvement in some aspects. Went 4-2 as a starter this year. So he's not like, if you have to go to him, at least to start the season, it's not like a hit the panic button situation where it's like so bleak that you can't win games with him. I do think with the improved offensive line, they had some injuries later in the year that really hurt them, but Ekwonu, the guy from NC State that they drafted a couple years ago, is a hit. And I think the offensive line is going to continue to get better. And they've already locked up DJ Moore, who I think is a very underrated receiver. They could use a piece or two on that offense, considering that you just traded away Christian McCaffrey. But I think Chuba Hubbard is a really good back, really young back that I watched a lot of at Oklahoma State. And then Deontay Foreman as well, the guy out of Texas. They spell each other well. So I think that running game with the improving offensive line is going to be a feature of this Panthers offense moving forward. And that could be intriguing for a quarterback to come in there, considering now you have that running game as a weapon. Get another receiver or two, and I think this Panthers offense isn't as far away as you think. And the defense is really what intrigues me. You mentioned it, Brian Burns. He's the building block, obviously. But you have Derek Brown, who had a solid year. Nothing to write home about, but a solid year for this Panthers defense. He was the top 10 pick I think you were thinking of from a couple seasons ago out of Auburn. And then Frankie Louvu is a really underrated guy. Not quite sure where they found him. I'm not that far in the weeds of the Panthers roster yet. But he's been solid for them as well. You have some solid linebacker options. Brandon Smith, Shaq Thompson, the list goes on and on. And I think J.C. Horn, man, the guy out of South Carolina, he's going to be a star. I think he's trending that way. He is an up-and-coming star cornerback. There are holes to fill around the roster, but almost all teams have holes. And I think with the amount of young talent that you have and the amount of draft capital that you have with four draft picks this year in the top 3 rounds, I think you have opportunities to build on this young talent. And then you have an aggressive owner that will go get you the quarterback that you need. And you can fill in spots from there. And you're not that far away from winning this division. So for me, I think the Colts aren't a bad job. The Broncos are a better job than people are thinking because of the Russell Wilson situation. I think it's better than people think. But I actually think the Panthers are the runaway number 1 here for all the reasons I just said.
Yeah, I think um, the more points he made, the more that made it clear for sure. And you mentioned David Tepper. He particularly has a mindset of we're never gonna tank. Obviously, when he was the stakeholder with the Steelers, they never had a losing season because they had Mike Tomlin. But obviously, things are different here with the Panthers. But that's one thing you can be assured in as a coach is that you'll never be asked to lose a game, even if it's for draft position, whatever the case may be. You're always going to be there to win, and I think that's always a good thing.
Yeah, and with David Tepper, I mean, yes, you had Mike Tomlin and you were with the Steelers, but you also had future Hall of Fame quarterback.
Yeah,
And so it's easy. It's easy when you have the head coach solidified and the Hall of Fame, possibly top 15 quarterback of all time at your disposal. Here you don't have that, but I do think you're building towards something with all this young talent. And you don't need I don't believe you need the elite quarterback with this roster the way that it's going. I think you're going to have a run game. The offensive line is improving. You're not in a particularly hard division as of right now. And this defense is going to be nasty, I think, with all this young talent. I think it's going to be a top 5, top 10 defense every year if they fill a couple holes here and there. Yeah, I'm really high on the Panthers' job. I don't know what the future holds in terms of how, like, their probability for competing next year. A lot has to happen between now and then before we start prognosticating about that for next year. The draft, free agency, moves have to be made, et cetera. They have to hire a coach, of course. That's the first order of business. And we'll see who that is. But yeah, I really like the Panthers job. So with all that being said, 1 hour, 22 minutes. We're right around where we usually are for a typical episode. We wanted to get this out to you guys on Thursday because you have Friday and then some of Saturday before the divisional round starts mid-afternoon on Saturday. So we'll try to put timestamps in the description. But before we sign off, I do want to make a quick announcement. I've wanted to do this for a long time, and it just hasn't happened yet. I haven't gotten around to it. But for those of you in Texas that like the Texas Longhorns and follow the Texas Longhorns like I do, maybe not to the extent that I do. I'm in the weeds with all the recruiting stuff and the transfer portal and even following, Texas basketball, watching every game, Texas baseball, et cetera, et cetera. I even watched, the volleyball team win the national championship just like a month or so ago. I was watching volleyball tournament games start to finish. So I'm really in the weeds of Texas athletics, but I am going to start a Texas athletics focus mini series on this channel. There'll be shorter podcast format videos covering Texas sports, my perspective on everything that's going on right now. Football season's over, but there's a lot going on with the football team, with transfer portal and recruiting. And then also the basketball team is obviously now right almost smack dab in the middle of Big 12 play. So that's interesting, and they've been doing well. And then college baseball starts in just over a month. So there's a lot to get to from a Texas sports perspective. So I'll be covering all that on the mini series, and I hope to get the first episode out sometime this weekend. So just be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, make sure to look out for that. That'll be out on podcast platforms as well, Spotify, Apple, all the platforms that the main podcast is on. So keep a lookout for it. And I'll let you sign us off.
I don't actually have an outro in mind. Do you want to try? Do you want to give it a go?
Just like Matt Rule, Steve Wilkes. I don't have the list in front of me. Shit. And all the other coaches that got fired. We are going, gone.
Just like all the
Peace out.
coaches that got fired, we are going, gone. Peace out.
Peace out.